Dus ja, vandaag zullen we over Sustainable IT spreken en over ook de Institute for Sustainable IT. So yeah, I was head of internal support, IT operations, IT infrastructure, application development, etc. So I've seen a bit of the different types of jobs that you may have. And I had no idea, despite all of that, I had no idea of the impact of the environmental impact, potentially social impacts as well of IT. So when I discovered all that, I decided to leave the functions and to found Green IT Belgium, which is a consulting company. But soon after, I realized that giving consultancy on Green IT is actually pretty expensive, and for most companies and most organizations, it was too expensive. So as my goal was really to go for something very broad where as many people as possible could get the right information about what is sustainable IT, I decided to initiate the Belgian Institute for Sustainable IT, which is a non-profit association and the sister of the French Institut du Numérique Responsable. I'll talk about that in a minute. So what is sustainable IT first? The goal is really to go about sustainable development into IT. So it's the 3P from sustainable development, people, planet, prosperity, that we try to translate into IT world. And that starts by Green IT. So Green IT is about reducing the environmental impact of IT itself. We'll see what kind of impact we may have. It's also about IT for green, which is about using IT to reduce our environmental impact in other domains, like, for example, managing buildings automatically so that you reduce your energy footprint and greenhouse gas emissions as a result. It can be used also in agriculture, in any kind of domain today. You can use IT to reduce your footprint. And then there's all the social aspects, so like inclusivity, accessibility for handicapped people, for example, but also working conditions in the mines needed to extract the minerals to create our equipment. There's plenty of different human aspects to IT. And so the goal is really to look at all that, and for IT professional, that brings an additional purpose in what they do, because what we see is that actually through doing sustainable IT as part of your work in a company, you really can bring added value from a corporate social responsibility point of view. So there's I'll show a few examples in the presentation today. What's the association about? As I said, it's a non-profit association. It's a place where we don't only think and reflect about what can be done, but also try to act, provide tools, guidelines, guides, working groups, etc., for our participants, and also for partners like universities, for example. We really try to work with all sectors of society, like, of course, companies, but also other non-profits, universities, public services, etc. And our goal is, as I said, to help our participants understand the challenges that we have in front of us and understand how they can react to that. One of the things which is probably important to mention is that, as you've heard, sustainable development is really becoming a very high topic on the agenda of companies overall and public authorities as well. I'm personally convinced that for a CIO or a CTO who would not be taking into account the impact of IT, probably within a few years, he or she will be out of a job, because the taking into account these aspects and really planning ahead to reduce these impacts is, I think, going to be really key. We see that most very large investors like BlackRock, for example, are really looking at companies that are managing properly their footprint, including things like IT that usually went a bit under the radar until now. So the association has not just started a few months ago. Actually, it started in 2014 through an informal association of very large companies in France, like Renault, Decathlon, SNCF, EDF, the electricity in France. So there were around 30 companies that were already working together around Green IT since 2014. They worked like that until 2018, and then they decided to extend their scope from Green IT to Sustainable IT and create a formal non-profit association in 2018. And since then, they've been providing things like, for example, the charter and the label Sustainable IT, so NR in French, Numérique Responsable, Sustainable IT. So there's a charter that we propose to members and non-members. There's a label that we also propose for companies. We have a presentation tomorrow about the label for those who would be interested. And then in 2020, in October last year, we founded the Belgian Institute for Sustainability. And in January of this year, we also created the Swiss Institute for Sustainability. And the goal is to continue to open in other countries like that. You see in 2021, the winner, that's a tool that we provide for free to our members and also non-members to help you measure the footprint of your IT services for companies. The difference is that members get more information out of the report that they get out of this tool. In France, we've got more than 80 members already, so they've got a bit more than 2 years of age, so that explains why they've got so many. With only a few months, actually, we've got already 22 members today because we got 2 new members since I created the slides. But you see that we have from very small to very large associations, very small to very large companies. If you see Accenture, Ageas, Belfius, Luminus, the MIVB, all those are of course very large. You have public services like MIVB or BRIC Brussels. So there's a bit of everything. It really represents the society at large, and our goal is to go as broadly as we can and also to talk to as many organizations as possible. We started more easily with Wallonia thanks to the links with France, I would say, then expanded to Brussels, and we are now starting to talk as much as possible to Flanders and the federal government as well. And of course, I forgot to mention, but we're also working closely with the European Commission and especially with the DG Connect, where we have very good contacts. So, question for you, the environmental impact of IT services. When you look at it for a person, there's tons of different studies that give the total footprint of a person. But if you look at the total footprint for one person, including clothes, food, transport, etc. If I take the study here from the ADEME in France, they say it's roughly 12 tons of CO2 equivalent per year per person. To give you an order of magnitude, I'll show you what how it's composed for the transport. You've got almost 3 tons of CO2 for transport, which come out of cars, manufacturing of the car and using the car. 1,500 kilo for using your car, 500 kilo for the planes, etc., as you can see. Now, just so that you think for a second before I give you the answer, where would you put the impact of using digital technologies in your day-to-day work, at home and at work, of course, the total of it? Would it be like other transports, planes, car, or the total of transports, or something like that? Because of course we talk very often about reducing the footprint of car transport and planes, etc., but we don't talk so much about reducing the footprint of IT. And if you look at that, actually, for the average population, 1.2 tons of CO2 come from digital technologies, and for an employee, it's roughly 1.5. So you see that we are exactly in the same range as the usage of the car. And as I said, we've been talking for forever about using less our cars and reducing the footprint of our cars, but we barely ever mention the footprint of our IT technology usage. And this comes from your computer at work or at home, your iPad, your smartwatch, your television, your internet connection, etc., etc. It's really everything which is digital that is included in there. So that is for people like Belgian, French, Netherlands, etc. That gives an idea. But at world level, we see that we are, let me just activate the small laser pointer. We are at something like 4.5%, according to the Shift project. We are approximately at 4.5%, almost 5% of the greenhouse gas emissions man-made that come from digital technologies. And you see we are on the green line, and at the rate at which we are increasing, we are going to go at something like almost 8% by 2025. And if we stay on the same speed of increase, we'll be at in 2030, we'll be at 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions that will come from digital technologies. What we are trying to defend is a sobriety scenario where we would remain under 5%. It's not impossible. It's not about stopping to use IT services. It's about using them differently. It's about, for example, managing better our equipment, the lifetime, etc. We'll see solutions in this presentation. Don't hesitate to send me some questions in the chat if you want to. I'll try to follow while I speak. So, to give you a simple example, just about greenhouse gas emissions, because of course there's tons of other impact that I'll mention a bit as well, like natural resources, water, etc. But let's talk first about greenhouse gas emissions. If you take a simple website, you can estimate the footprint of watching, browsing on one page of a website. There are different tools for that. One of the tools is called EcoIndex, and of course it's a snapshot at one point in time, and it varies every day depending on the photos, etc. that you're putting on the page. But so you see here for the VRT, on that day it was 2 grams 59 of CO2 to watch that page. That includes everything like the server, the network, and an estimation of the laptop or the smartphone or the tablet that you're using to watch that. To look at that page. So 2 grams 59 is not too much, and it's like 20 meters by car or something like that. But the thing is that at the time they had 18 million views per month. So when you multiply one by the other, you reach 47 tons of CO2 per month. That's the equivalent of 12,000 kilometers per day by car. So just for the homepage of VRT, you haven't seen yet a single video, you haven't seen a single article. You see that we are talking about big numbers when you look at the total impact of watching a page. And it's even worse when you go on other sites like, for example, Le Monde in France. They've got a better rating. It was 259 for VRT. But the thing is that they've got much more viewers, 140 million. So that's equivalent to 300 tons of CO2, 80,000 kilometers per day. Now, if VRT had optimized to have 2 gram 16 instead of 2 gram 59, they would save the equivalent of 2,000 kilometers per day of greenhouse gas emission just for the homepage. That's just to give you an indication. Of course, it's not something that you need to look at for each and every company, because if you have a very small website, which is not your main access point, I would say, for your customers, if mainly you go through, I don't know, Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever social media, and not so much through your website, it's not interesting to optimize your website. But if you have a lot of traffic on your website, then potentially it becomes an important source of gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So this is just to give you some hint already of the type of impact. Now, it's not limited, as I said, to greenhouse gas emissions. There's energy consumption, there's water consumption, there's, of course, electricity, and then there's ADP, that's abiotic resources, that's natural resources except fossil fuels. And when you look at an IT service, IT infrastructure, you can usually split it in 3 layers. You have the user equipment, the network that are required to connect to data centers. Okay, so 3 tiers, I would say, in a standard system. Where do you think the key source of impact would be? Do you think it would be at data center level, at network level, or at user equipment level? I'll let you just pick your guess, and I'll show you the answer. Usually when I ask people to answer through a survey or something like that, most of the people, at least 50%, reply data center. And the actual answer is user equipment. Why is that? Simply because of the number of user equipment that we have. If you look at data centers, there's roughly 100 million servers in the world, a bit less, 100 million servers. There's a bit more than 1 billion network devices. And there's more than 40 billion user equipment devices. Okay, so it's just because of these numbers that we that there's such an impact on user equipment. But you see that in terms of electricity consumption for networks and data center, it is higher than the other indicators, simply because networks and data centers are running all day long. year round, while for your personal equipment like television, etc., probably when you are at work, your television is switched off, your etc. etc. So of course, in terms of electricity consumption, it is less impacting, while all the other ones are very high. Why are they very high? Even if you switch everything off, simply because of the manufacturing of the equipment. If you look at the impact of manufacturing of user equipment, it's the vast majority of the impact. For the resources, natural resources, it's almost obvious that all the resources are coming at the time of extracting resources and then manufacturing. But for water as well, it's using a lot. And for greenhouse gas emissions, there's also a lot of emissions that are linked directly to the manufacturing. And you can see that through what we call ACV, so LCA, life cycle analysis. And I'll show you an example published by Apple, but you can find examples for tens of Apple devices or Dell devices. There's also some information for HP, Lenovo, but a bit less than Dell and Apple. What they show is, for example, for this iPad mini, through the life cycle, so sourcing materials is extracting the minerals, then manufacturing, packaging everything to ship it where you can buy it, and then you start using it. And at the end, hopefully, we recover something. Unfortunately, we don't recover a lot. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you see that for the whole life cycle, there's 70 kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions for the whole life cycle. And if you look at the split between these different steps of the life cycle, 81% come from the production. That is actually the vast majority is by sourcing materials, and a small part is by the actual manufacturing. 81% of the impact comes before you even buy the equipment. So imagine when you go and buy an iPad or a smartphone, because it's very, very similar, you've got a rucksack of 70 kilo of carbon emissions on your back, even before you switch on your mobile phone. That's just enormous. And then the rest, 80% of 70 kilo are on your back already, and then the rest will come when you start using it. I was mentioning the recovery. We will talk about that in another slide, which is about the end of life management of our device. But so you see that there's a lot of impact linked to production of IT equipment. Actually, that has an impact in terms of pollution, because you've probably heard that in the recent years, we've been decreasing year by year our greenhouse gas emissions in countries like France, Belgium, etc. Unfortunately, that does not take into account all the importation of materials and equipment that we are doing. When you take into account the importations, suddenly it starts to increase a lot. And of course, IT equipment is 100% almost imported in Belgium and Europe. So that kind of impact is directly linked to, for example, IT equipment. How can we reduce? So yeah, actually we as I've written, we are exporting our pollution. So the greenhouse gas emissions linked to the manufacturing of our equipment is done in other countries. So if you look at it worldwide, because of course there's no frontier for pollution, for such type of pollution at least, when you look at it worldwide, actually our own emissions are increasing, but in other parts of the world. To try to limit that, the only way is to buy less equipment, but also to extend the life of the equipment that we have or that we need to buy. So typically for companies, we have purchasing guides, purchasing policies, where you try to help you adapt your purchasing policies and to train your purchasers so that you can buy equipment that is more easily repairable, either internally in the company or at the end of life of the equipment in your company, that it becomes more easy to repair so that it can have a second life. Once you don't need the computer, the laptop, the smartphone, whatever, in your company, you can give it a second life by reselling it, by giving it to a charity, something like that. They will refurbish it, which creates local jobs and will help avoid creating traffic of waste. So 2 points are important in there. Creating local jobs first. There's a study from the European Commission. They analyzed that if we would refurbish only 20% of our smartphones, we would, so in Europe, 20% of the smartphones in Europe, we would create 29,000 jobs. If we would refurbish 30%, so it's not enormous numbers, we would create more than 40,000 jobs. And that is just for smartphones. Now, imagine if we would do the same for tablets, laptops, screens, etc. We would really be able to create an important number of jobs in Europe. And for example, a Smart World that you see there, they were founded a bit less than 2 years ago. They have 15 full-time equivalent now. They are growing fast thanks to this kind of activity. It's really about creating jobs. The traffic of waste I mentioned there. That is an important point as well. Interpol estimates that more than 65% of our equipment go through traffics to countries like Ghana, for example, mainly Ghana and then some other countries in Africa and Asia. More than 65%. And according to Greenpeace, it's something like 90%. So probably the truth is between the two. But why is Interpol looking at that? Simply because it's a real mafia type of traffic. It's really about big money. And they are trying to reuse that. It's not only about pollution, it's really about mafia type of traffic. So if we give a second life to our device with real traceability, if you really make sure that your partner who handles your equipment can give you full traceability of where your devices will end up, you are fighting against mafia type of traffic. And also, you may consider now starting to buy refurbished equipment, because in the past, it was very difficult for companies to buy equipment like that, simply because you would buy like 2 Apple, 1 HP, 2 Lenovo, etc. It was just impossible for large companies to manage it that way. But now you're able to buy 100, 200, 300 of exactly the same laptops that are refurbished. Usually, it's like 2 to 3 years old, not more, and it comes with a brand new battery. It's an upgraded hard drive into an SSD, etc., a bit more memory, so that you can continue to use the laptop. And it really is something very good. For example, I'm personally using a refurbished laptop, and it was really, really nice to buy because it's much cheaper as well. And the whole question behind all that is about mindset. We are completely used to buying a second-hand car for, I don't know, for our children, or second car for the house or something like that. Why are we not yet used to buying second-hand electronic equipment? And when you think about it twice, when you are in a second-hand car, you're taking a live risk. You're driving on 120 kilometers an hour on the motorway, etc. So there's really a potential risk for your own life. The risk on a second-hand smartphone is fairly limited, especially if you go through a good refurbisher who will provide a 1, 2, or 3 years warranty. So for companies, if it's not about refurbished equipment, there's just also guidelines about sustainable purchasing. I already showed you the iPad mini. You can see the estimation of footprint. When you go into a laptop, of course, it increases. But when you start going, for example, into screens, there can be a massive type of impact. So when you decide to equip all your colleagues with 2 screens instead of 1, for example, that has an impact, especially if you decide to equip your meeting rooms with very large screens. As you can see, the 75-inch, that's equivalent to 21,000 kilometers by car just for 1 screen. And more you see in large meeting rooms, you see 2 very, very large screens next to each other. It has a major impact. If you want to have the same type of screen, a projector has much less footprint. Of course, it's a bit noisy, etc., but much less than before. If you look at the sheer difference in number of greenhouse gas emissions, there's really a question behind that, of course. So there's different types of label that exist. I'm showing you here the 3 that are really good labels, I would say, in IT world. There's others which are much closer to greenwashing type of labels. And also we have published with the French government, we have published a guide in French, and we are translating it now into English. It's 144 pages, so it's not a small guide. Provides tons of information about sustainable IT buying, not only for equipment, but also for services, for cloud, etc. So when you stop looking at equipment, the other side of the impact is, of course, the usage of your IT services. And as you can see, for the 100% of the usage impact, there's only 20% which is not video related. There's 20% which is related to, for example, videos like we are doing now. Yes, the guide that I just mentioned before will be available in English soon. I hope that it will be soon, but it is available to members and non-members. It is through the. I'll provide a link afterwards to Mark. So the video like we are doing now, and the biggest chunk is about online video like Netflix, YouTube, etc. There's also a nice chunk of pornography, as you can see, and that is really a big impact. It's 306 million tons of CO2 just for these 60% in 2018. And remember that it has increased a lot, especially with the confinement. Of course, you have probably read everywhere that Netflix has been increasing the market share and the business a lot. When you look at 306 million tons of CO2, is that a lot? Is that not a lot? Just order of magnitude, 1 ton of CO2 is one return flight for one passenger from Paris to New York. So 306 million return passengers, Paris, New York, or Brussels, New York. Okay, so it's really massive type of impact. Now, for companies, what can they do? Because of course, companies are not all using videos in their communication or something like that. So there's of course something that you can look at in the way that you are using videos as a company. But there's also things that you can do in your non-video usage, and that will be typically for all your application, all your services. And that is what I'll briefly talk about now. The first thing is the code. The way that we are coding now has really completely changed compared to the time of the LEM. If you look at the size of the code that was on the LEM to land on the moon, it's 70 kilobytes. That's the equivalent of an average email today without an attachment. Okay, can just imagine the loss of quality, I would say, that we have. Of course, we don't have the same constraints that we had at the time, but a big chunk comes from using automated code generators, and also some languages like Python, for example, is much less efficient in terms of environmental impact compared to other types of languages. So the way you write code will have for sure an impact. Also, the quantity of data that you will transmit, so the usage of bandwidth will have a direct impact as well. The example that we see here, that's for the Deutsche Bahn. That's the standard Deutsche Bahn web page. You see it's 2 megabytes with all the features that you may find on that. Plenty of pictures, the possibility to reduce to book a hotel, car when you arrive at destination, etc. So of course, from a marketing perspective, it's very good. It includes something like 25 different type of features on that page. But what users are really after when they go on such a website is to be able to book, to find a train schedule and book a train ticket. And you can see that for something with a nice layout, it's already divided by more than 3 to go from one to the other, and users usually will prefer that kind of a screen. We have several studies showing that when a user can choose between 2 screens like that, they go to that kind of screens. And one good example is in France, for example. The traffic was completely captive of SNCF. Of course, everyone would go to SNCF websites to buy their train ticket. And Captain Train came out and decided to create a screen that looks very much like that. No feature apart from looking for a train ticket and buying your train ticket. And in a couple of years, they got 40% of the traffic coming from SNCF to their own website. So of course they take a small margin on the train ticket, but the price is exactly the same. They get that margin from SNCF. It's just amazing that you can, by providing a simpler website, you can steal the traffic from the main provider. If you take another example, a bit in the past, it used to be, for example, Google against Yahoo. You remember Yahoo, the very nice portal, etc. And then next to that, you had Google, which was just an empty page with a search line. Everyone went to Google because it was so much faster to load, especially because at that time it was not very, very quick to load a page. So, but we still have a lot of examples today showing that when you have a more simple type of design, you get more traffic. And then if you really want to be fully efficient, as efficient as possible, it's possible to do exactly the same with 3 kilobytes instead of 657. But of course, then it becomes something a bit more, well, not very user-friendly. So most companies would not go for that type of screen. But you see, depending on the type of need that you have, what type of user, how many users you have, etc., you may find ways to reduce the data transfer, which has a direct impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And then last example on eco-designing digital services is about, I'll take the example of LinkedIn because that's the most really shocking almost type of number. They've been able, by reviewing completely their infrastructure, their architecture, etc., they've been able to divide by 112 the number of servers that they needed at equivalent number of users. Of course, actually, they were and they still are growing in terms of number of users. So the goal for them was to be able to continue to grow without having to build new data centers all the time. Actually, what they've been able to do is to divide by 30 the number of servers that they needed and multiply the number of users that they have. And of course, when you divide by 30 the number of servers that you have, you strongly reduce your environmental footprint. But you can see that Facebook, of course, it's only 2 to 9 depending on service. Microsoft, it's divided by 5. For each of them, they've been able to divide the number of servers required to run their services. They didn't do it for environmental reasons originally. It was purely economical reasons, not having to build a new data center, for example. But there's a direct link between economic reasons and environmental reasons. It goes hand in hand, and really when you manage more efficiently your IT, you are able to reduce your cost and to reduce your environmental footprint in most cases. A simple example in the retail industry, sporting equipment, I won't say the name, but it starts by DCAT and it ends by LON. They provided, so they had a critical Java application that was used by all the salespeople on the shop floor. And it was very slow, as you can see, 12 seconds just to ask a question like, I don't know, I want that sports shoe in 39 blue, size 39 blue. And the salesperson had to look on the screen, wait 12 seconds, and then on Saturdays you had massive queues. Just by optimizing all the SQL queries, they were able to divide by 3 the number of servers required, and to reduce the waiting time, and of course, as a result, the wasted time for the salespeople. The return on investment, 2 million euro per year for an investment of 80 man days. Again, we are bringing together economic reasons with a direct environmental gain of 3 times less servers, because you've seen that equipment is the key in terms of impact. In the training that we provide to our members, there's of course many more examples. We spend 2 days on the generic information about sustainable IT and 2 days on eco-designing digital services. So we can go dig much more in detail for all of that. Complete counterexample, and maybe some of you have invested in that. It's the Bitcoin or other types of cryptocurrencies, but the Bitcoin is really the most interesting one again in that type of information. If you look just one example, because there's tons of statistics on that, if you take one Bitcoin transaction, it has the same footprint as 975,000 Visa transactions. Imagine if all our payment transactions, not just Visa, but also MasterCard, Bank Contact, Maestro, etc., you name them in all the countries, if they would all have to go through a cryptocurrency implemented like the Bitcoin, the enormous impact it would have in terms of carbon footprint, in terms of electricity consumption, etc. So there's tons of discussions about the impact of the Bitcoin. Yeah, everyone's now many people are saying, but the Bitcoin is running mainly on green type of energy. Unfortunately, that's not completely true, first of all. But secondly, that means that energy which is coming from green or renewable resources cannot be used for something else. So as a result of that, all these renewable source of energy cannot be put for using for the population, for industry, etc., and they are used for the Bitcoin. So as a result, we are still using coal in most countries to provide electricity. So there's a real impact. What do I want to say with that example of the Bitcoin? It is not the question of the blockchain, it's the question of how the blockchain was implemented. There are tons of ways to implement a blockchain which has much less environmental impact, and some cryptocurrencies are going in that direction. Some are already there, some are switching. The same with the artificial intelligence, for example, depending on how you create and especially for the machine learning part of the artificial intelligence, you will have a very large impact or not too much of an impact when creating that type of application. So every time you will be looking at new technologies to create services, there's a direct question to be asked is what will be the environmental impact, especially if it picks up. So there's a question to review regularly your implementation to reduce the footprint, especially of new technologies. So I mentioned already the code, the bandwidth, the infrastructure needs. There's, of course, something very important that I mentioned at the beginning, which is about helping your users to extend the lifetime of their devices. If you create an application that will only run on 5G, you force all your clients to switch to a 5G smartphone, 5G tablet or something like that. If you create an application that is able to run and benefit from 5G, but is also able to run on a 3G, potentially with slightly tweaked versions or something like that, or a way of working depending on the type of network, you allow your users to keep their equipment longer. And as we've seen, the equipment is really the key, especially the end user equipment and devices is really the key to reduce the total footprint of digital technologies. So that's really something that we look at strongly when we are designing digital services. And then we look at the user for other things, like I mentioned, handicaps, for example, inclusion, making sure that as many people as possible can use your services. For public services, it's especially important because if you try to reduce the number of places where you can access public services and you don't focus on your users in terms of potentially handicap or financial limitations or stuff like that, you may cut yourself away from a big part of the population. I'll take a simple example, very nice website that you can look at to simulate. There's different of them, but that's a good example to simulate, as you can see, color blindness, visual impairment, blindness, hearing impairment, and motor disability. You can simulate them and have a bit of an idea. I'll take the color blindness example. If you don't have an impairment, this graph looks completely readable, very easy. But the thing is that if you're colorblind, this is what it looks like potentially, depending on the type of color blindness. It may be completely gray or whatever. But as you can see, it becomes completely impossible to read which one is what. And that's something, it's not just about a website or about an application for your clients. It's just for the presentations that you're giving to your colleagues, your boss, maybe your board, I don't know. You have to know that 8% of men are colorblind in the world. There's only 0.5% of women, they're very lucky, but 8% of men, that's almost 1 in 10 person men is colorblind. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, from Facebook is colorblind. That's why he chose Facebook, because when he chose Facebook, the logo in blue, it's because it's the color he sees best. So really anyone could be colorblind, and there's easy ways, as I said, even at work, to change the way you're presenting stuff. If you have that kind of graph, just present it that way. For a non-colorblind person, very easy to read. For a colorblind person, it's also very easy to read. You see? So it's not only about creating application, websites, etc. Now, when you think about accessibility, you will get more clients because you see that's the age curve. As you can see, every decade the average age increases a lot. You can see for men and for women. The thing is that 1 person in 4 above 65 years of age has got some sort of handicap, 1 person in 4. And worldwide, without taking into account the age, 1 person in 7 has got some sort of disability. So if you don't look at accessibility of your services in terms of potential different types of disabilities, vision, physical, for example, if you have very small buttons on a website or links that you need to click on, and you have a shaking person, they simply can't click on the right place. That's very simple, but so designing potentially for taking into account all these aspects helps you get more clients. 1 person in 7 worldwide, that's massive. So there's plenty of guidelines. You can find them here, amongst others. The guidelines to create accessible websites, but also applications, of course. And when you do all that, as I wrote above, you get more clients. And when you get overall more clients and less cost, you help your business to grow. Something in addition to that in terms of business growth, and that's particularly interesting for Belgium, I think, and for Europe, generally speaking. The European Union is putting a lot of money on the table for the Green Deal recovery plan, 750 billion. There's 39 billion for Belgium out of that. When you look at these numbers, if you sum them up, there's 57% which are linked to some sort of green digital transformation. 57% of 39 billion is not bad, huh? And of course, all that goes with all the aspects like GDPR in terms of transparency, data protection, but also the inclusivity that I already mentioned, etc., etc. So all the aspects that we are talking about in sustainable IT are really covered in the Green Deal. That's also why we are talking a lot with the DG Connect, but also other government and public services, etc., because everyone is really looking at that. That means that if you want to be able to provide your services to companies that are applying for that kind of funds, you will need to be able as well to answer with sustainable IT type of offering. The public purchasing of the European Commission, of the Belgium, of France, etc., all the public purchasing is becoming greener and greener in the sense of applying sustainable IT purchasing policies. That means also that all the very large companies are going to apply exactly the same type of policies, because that's what usually they do for that kind of things, especially to be able to answer to the needs of public service or to the requirements. But as a result, if you're a small company and you don't apply sustainable IT, you will not be able to provide your services to big companies or to public services. So there's really a question about starting now, because the earlier you start, the easier it will be. Maybe you've been impacted by the GDPR transition. If you were already managing your data fairly well before GDPR, it was fairly easy probably as a transition, or still difficult. If you did not prepare anything and you had to be ready on time suddenly, it was a nightmare. It's exactly the same with sustainable IT. Start early to make it not painful, because actually it's not painful. It's just changing the way you work, but it's not a major project that has to come on top of all the other priorities. You just integrate that in your other priorities. Almost finished. If your CSR strategy, so corporate social responsibility strategy, is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, actually we can help you work on up to 9 different types of objectives, sustainable development objectives. You know that each of them is divided into sub-objectives. So you can see the number 16.4, for example, illicit financial flow. That's what I was mentioning with the traffic earlier today. But so for 9 of these sustainable development goals, you can work and you can ask your IT teams to have a direct impact on your responsibility as a company, which is really nice, because suddenly you can transfer the objectives that you usually put in a company report. You can really translate that into personal and team objectives for your team members, which is not always the case. So to summarize, should you adopt sustainable IT? I would say yes, for every color. And I'll give you, to finish, 3 small tips at home that you can apply at home like at work. The first one, works for both is to buy less equipment, of course, as much as possible. Think twice before buying something, because there's good chances that you will not use it a lot. It may end up in a cupboard or something like that. So think twice before buying. But if you need to buy, potentially you may buy something refurbished. Try to keep it as long as possible, as long as you need it and it's in working condition. And if you don't need it, give it a second life, sell it, give it away to a charity, something. And in case it's really not working and not repairable, etc., then make sure that it is recycled. Okay, so the Recupel, for example, in terms of recycling is good, but don't go to Recupel to give a second life, because most of the time, if you put your stuff in a Recupel type of box, it will be broken by all the things that people are dumping above it. So equipment, very first tip. Second tip, this one is hopefully more for home than for work, is about video streaming. Try to look less at video, of course. So if you can avoid binge watching, that would be great. But if you are looking at video streaming, take a lower definition as much as possible. So especially on smartphones or tablet, there's no point at taking full HD or even HD. You won't see the difference. So if you're, I don't know, just watching the news or a simple YouTube video or something like that, where the definition is not key, take a lower definition. You will have less impact in terms of data transfer. And second, try to avoid using the 4G, especially for streaming, because streaming is sending a lot of data, and 4G consumes 3 times more energy than the Wi-Fi. So if you can choose a Wi-Fi, of course, secured Wi-Fi. Take a Wi-Fi rather than 4G. If you want to watch a Netflix series on the train, for example, for most of them, you can download them before leaving home, and you will still be able to watch your series, but at least it will not be with 4G, so you will reduce by 3 times the energy consumption already. And then, probably you've heard in the past we used to say that by deleting your email, you would save the planet. Unfortunately, that's not true at all. But the very first things about email and files, etc., is about avoiding to create more data. So limiting the use of emails in terms of sending less emails. When you send emails, think about to whom you're sending. If you receive an email with tons of people in copy, don't do a reply to all if you can avoid it, because that's just multiplicating the number of data that you're sending. Avoid sending images in your emails, and files. Avoid sending files. If you need to send a file, you can upload it on a site like WeTransfer, Swiss Transfer, FileVer. There's tons of these transfer sites. So you upload it once, you get a link to that file, and you send the link to the people that you want to send the email to. The advantage is that this file is only uploaded once. Only the people who really want to take a copy of it will receive it, will take it. The other people who receive the email but don't need the file, they don't get the file. And on top of that, it does not stay in the email servers forever, because you know, like me, that many people are not cleaning correctly their old emails. So if you send the file, the file will be there forever in the email file of the recipient. Even additional advantage is that on sites like WeTransfer, Swiss Transfer, etc., after 7 days for WeTransfer or 1 month for Swiss Transfer, the file will automatically be deleted. So there's an auto cleaning of the files that is taking place, avoiding that you're keeping forever the data that you have sent for temporary use most of the time. So that's it for me today, and I see that we have a question. I'll let you also have a look at our LinkedIn. This is the place where we communicate most often. The website is not used as a communication means. It's just there for some information and some links, but it's mainly through LinkedIn at the moment that we are communicating.